everybody for being out here with us today. I know it's middle of the week. It's just before the holidays. Thankfully, it's warm, so I gotta love that part at least. But I know it's not always easy for all of us, but it makes a very big difference because we all care about our country, we care about each other, and these are important things. And every time we come out to support each other, it gives other people that chance to say, okay, I'm coming out too. Let's really do something. Let's make sure it's going to be better. And I'm always happy to see such a big crowd, especially in the middle of the week, in December, just before the holidays. So I just wanted to say that first and foremost. I also want to thank the American Legion for allowing us to be here. It is a great location, not for any other reason than, if nothing else, I mean, look at what we have around us. This is why we are able to speak. This is why we can be free. And I just want to mention that. I always find it important when I'm in a VFW, when I'm in American Legion, to just thank the people who made it possible for us all to be here today and have the freedoms we have. So with that said, I want to start off. And here we go. So, I want to thank you all for being here today with us. And I know that Christmas is around the corner, and that the 2016 elections are, for most people, far in the future. So I also want to thank you for being aware that right now, this is one of the most critical times in the election process. Not just for the presidential race, but at all levels of government. Since I was first asked to speak at this event, there has been a lot that has happened in the world. Paris was attacked by coordinated, multi-pronged terrorist bombings and shootings. In the United States, a husband and wife team killed 14 people at an office Christmas party in San Bernardino, California. Our elected leaders at all levels of government responded, each with a clear message about how the nation would be affected now and post-2016 elections. We've heard from President Obama and all the Democrat candidates that the answer to domestic terrorists is more gun restriction legislation. Today, Democrats in Congress introduced a new gun ban, the 1994 gun ban, and they did this even as an ABC poll was released today, showing that 53% of the nation rejects those very same gun bans. Specifically, in New York State, we've heard our governor, Andrew Cuomo, agree and push for a national acceptance of the New York SAFE Act. With both of our senators in unison with that push. Going even more locally, we've heard from our congressman of the New York 22nd Congressional District, at least for this time, Mr. Representative Richard Hanna, implying that he supports imposing a no-fly list gun ban, and rejected calls by county sheriffs across the state that have asked for those with a concealed carry license to be on guard for the safety of families and friends and our community. So how does this all connect? Where is the nation at this time, and where will we be going? What will be the consequences we all have to live with? And I want to go over this point by point. There's a push by the anti-Second Amendment groups to restrict our freedoms. This is what gun restriction laws do. They restrict freedom with the implied benefit of the nation being able to sleep at night, secure in the thought that they are safer. I will stand before you today and say that that is a lie. This is not about safety. This is about control.
Absolutely.
It's a fact that California has all of the gun restriction legislations that President Obama and the Democrats insist are needed. They have a gun ban on the types of models of guns and modifications for those guns. They have a universal background check. They have munition bans and magazine bans and waiting periods. California, like every state across the entire nation, have gun-free zones. Not one of these things has stopped gang shootings, or criminals bent on violence, nor criminally insane radical Islamist terrorists. In fact, in the San Bernardino case, pipe bombs, which are illegal across the entire nation, were being mass-produced, and several were used in that event. Thankfully, those bombs didn't go off. Otherwise, the death toll would have been far, far greater. But the point is that these laws, like the New York SAFE Act, fail. And we must ask the question, why? Because they're not designed to prevent a mass shooting or an act of terrorism. They're not meant to protect the public. They are meant to control the way people think and deny the freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution. A ban on firearms is, by definition, useless. I've researched several times since 2013 the number of deaths by various firearms. On average, rifles have been less than 0.2% of the weapons used to kill Americans. But you won't see that statistic on the evening news or reported by President Obama. Yet those numbers are available from the CDC and through several studies that have been done.
FBI too.
That's one of them, yes. Background checks can work if the individual of that check has done something that puts them on the list. But to my knowledge, and in the research I have done, none of the mass shooters in any event since 2013, and I believe since before that, have ever been on any watch list in any state or at any level of the federal government. A watch list is only as good as the criteria of that list. Again, that is a fact, and that's been downplayed for those who support the Second Amendment. Waiting periods and munitions, and bans on munitions don't work either. Terrorists, like in San Bernardino, take time to stockpile what they need. These acts are premeditated, they're practiced, they're planned. They are rarely actions that occur on the spur of the moment. And even for those non-terrorist criminals, access to munitions and firearms are things that occur, in some cases, years prior to the attack, invalidating the effectiveness of any ban. And let's talk about gun-free zones. Gun-free zones aren't gun-free. Estimates are that 92% of all the mass shootings on record, going back decades to the 1970s, have occurred in locations that either are or retroactively have been gun-free zones. That means schools, malls, government buildings, public spaces, almost everywhere that you've seen a shooting. The existence of a sign, like a gun restriction law that's on the books, has no impact on the desire of these lunatics to kill innocent Americans. In fact, when pressed to give an answer on this, Press Secretary Josh Earnest spoke on behalf of the White House and stated clearly what is the reality. When he was asked by a reporter, Byron Tao, on December 10th of 2015, if there was a single case where a gun restriction ban or a background check has prevented a mass shooting, Earnest declined to answer. When he was directly asked in follow-up by Tao if the San Bernardino shooters were on the much-hyped no-fly list, the answer from Earnest was, "Not that I'm aware of."
Not very earnest.
Now, keep in mind that given all of the above, when Press Secretary Ernest was asked on December 3rd if President Obama believes that gun restriction legislation would stop terrorists and terrorist mass shootings, and he was asked by reporter Peter Ducey, he responded, and I quote, "Yes, the president believes that passing common sense gun laws that make it harder for people with bad intentions to get guns makes the country safer." Let's let that sink in for a second, versus everything else we just said. Now, before I go further, I want to address something that the detractors often say, and that's going to be that I left out the no-fly gun bans and other lists of that nature. Well, let's address that, about those criminals, the mentally unstable, religious fanatics, and all the others that wind up on these lists. Representative Richard Hanna, who spoke on WUTQ on December 4th, who supports a no-fly ban list for guns. Sorry, my own typing, can't even read what I type. Representative Richard Hanna supports a gun ban, such as the no-fly list, that the federal and state government support that we've seen don't work. Besides the fact that, to date, these lists have yet to identify any mass shooter prior to their depraved acts, the problem is that these lists are used as catch-alls. The no-fly lists being touted right now contain 72 members of the Department of Homeland Security. It includes half a dozen members of Congress. It's included members of our military who have been returning home from active duty tours where they've been protecting our nation and our values with their lives and honor. In fact, there are thousands of Americans on these lists that have no relation to the threats or the safety of Americans, like dozens of children that appear on these lists. Children. Worst of all, these lists are quasi-secrets of the government. Any one of us today or listening on YouTube or any of the social media may in fact be on the no-fly list or any other terrorist watch list at this moment. You won't know that you're on that list until the moment that it directly restricts you, and at that point you must start the process to be removed from the list, and it may or may not get you off of the list, and it may take an unknown amount of time for that to happen, and you won't be told what the result is no matter what. Now let me ask you, does that sound like an act of safety? Does that sound like transparency? Does that sound like control? As Representative Trey Gowdy of South Carolina stated this month in a recent congressional meeting, he stated, quote, "Can you name another constitutional right that we have that is chilled until you find out it is chilled? And then you have to go to petition the government to get it back. Is that true with the First Amendment?" He went on to say, or my favorite, how about the Eighth Amendment? "We're going to subject you to cruel and unusual punishment until you petition the government to get off that list." Is there another constitutional right that we have that we treat the same way for American citizens that we do the Second Amendment? Can you think of one? No one can. Now, so given these facts, given all these facts to the contrary, President Obama, and echoed by Democratic candidates for the presidency and a horde of the anti-Second Amendment fanatics, believe America will be safer with less freedom. I say it again. Even in the face of empirical data disproving the argument to the restrictions on the constitutional freedoms we have, the feelings of Democrats and the anti-Second Amendment fringe is to continue to march on this path, and in my opinion, there can only be one of two reasons for this. Either the president and those that think like him are insane, and when I say that I mean as defined by Ben Franklin, who stated that doing the same thing over and over again but expecting a different result is insanity. Or what I actually think is the case, and what I think is more realistic, is that there's another agenda. And I believe that agenda is to take control. When I say control, I don't mean some conspiracy theory, that's often what they say, and such defenses of that view are by those who would destroy the Second Amendment. And it's only meant to distract and discredit reality when they call it a conspiracy. What I mean is the result of actions that are being pushed onto the American people, results that will likely not happen overnight, but will happen eventually. If we can see that gun restriction legislation fails at its proposed purpose, and I think I've made that case very clear, then what are we left with? We have one less freedom. Critically, this is the freedom that is the linchpin of the entire Constitution. The Second Amendment is the freedom that ensures all other rights are protected. Without it, there is nothing that restricts the government or guarantees our freedom of speech besides the goodwill of our leaders. So let's consider the goodwill of our political leaders. And I want to look at all of them, especially on the local level. Matter of fact, let's focus only on them. For our region, that's going to be Representative Richard Hanna, and another example I want to make, which is Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi. Now, as for Representative Richard Hanna, as I previously noted, he has stated his support of no-fly lists that have failed to stop a single mass shooting. He supports no-fly lists that include children, his fellow members of Congress, and those serving honorably in our military. He supports the restriction of American freedom in a manner that, as Representative Gowdy eloquently states, would not be allowed to restrict any other freedom guaranteed by the Constitution. But the goodwill does not stop there. In the very same live interview on air on WUTQ, Representative Hanna dismisses the right of Americans to be able to defend themselves. A standing member of Congress dismissed the right of Americans to defend themselves. He states in that interview that he sees no purpose for Americans who are licensed and registered to carry concealed firearms to actively be prepared to protect their families, friends, and communities in the face of a mass shooting. In fact, his exact words about the call to defend American people, as stated by the Ulster County Sheriff and echoed by several other county sheriffs across this entire state, was exactly, and I quote, "He can say what he likes. I don't see the point of that." End quote. So the goodwill of the representative of the 22nd New York District, his concern is for the safety of people he was elected to serve, is comprised of his willingness to deny the public of a right in a manner unacceptable to restrict any other right and dismiss the ability of licensed members of the public to defend themselves at the request of law enforcement. This is the goodwill that President Obama and Democrats want the public to put our lives in the hands of. But Representative Hanna is only one elected official. What does Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi believe? And I want to note that I am picking on him because he, in part, has stated that he has a desire to potentially run for Congress. And he's been back and forth about that. But that would be a promotion to a higher office with more of an impact on the lives of an even greater number of Americans than he serves right now. And so I would like to know, what goodwill does Assemblyman Brindisi bring to the table? In March of 2015, Assemblyman Brindisi put forth a bill to repeal portions of the SAFE Act. He also has voted against the SAFE Act. Now, that would make it seem like that he's a Democrat of a very different nature than what we're used to. But what seems to be the case is not always the reality when we look at the details that our politicians, many of them, don't want us to see. Assemblyman Brindisi, after voting against the SAFE Act, went dead silent on the issue. For 2 years, as Scope and individual Americans fought in courts and are continuing to fight in courts, and Assemblyman Brindisi said nothing. He did nothing. Neither through words nor actions did he act in favor of the public he serves or the Second Amendment itself. That is, until it was time for an election year. Then suddenly, he springs into action. But what happened with that the rejection of the SAFE Act that he put out there? Well, besides getting it written down as part of his voting record, and besides the only news coverage he's received beyond his local community, what's happened? Nothing. Assemblyman Brindisi allowed his repeal of the SAFE Act to die in the Assembly. He provided no defense for his bill when it came up. He didn't even appear at the hearing to have the bill considered to be presented on the floor of the New York Assembly. Thus, we must conclude the bill that he created was an act of self-aggrandizement, especially since Assemblyman Brindisi has not offered another bill or taken another action in regard to the New York SAFE Act. Thus, we must conclude that the presentation of the bill was a means to an end, a self-serving action for the benefit of exactly one person, himself, and his aspirations of political office. Again, I must ask, is this the goodwill that President Obama and those that would remove the Second Amendment us to trust in? Are these people and the incredulous disregards of facts truly making us American safe? Or is this a means to control the public under a guise of protection and superficial soothing of fears? Now, all of this brings me back to my original point. This time, right now, is the time to act. We, the people, must use the power guaranteed by our Constitution to protect ourselves. Not just from the criminals that violate our laws. Not just from the mentally unstable who lash out without empathy or understanding. Not just from radical religious fanatics and terrorists that will kill every American regardless of their political belief just for the mere fact that we exist and breathe. No, we must protect our freedoms that have built up the most free, prosperous, and diverse nation in the world. And we can do this. We can protect our families and our freedoms without violence or infringing on the rights of others. We don't need to attack the lifestyles of tens of millions of Americans. We don't need to control the actions or beliefs of the nation. All we need to do is vote and be aware of exactly who we are voting for. Each and every one of us has power. That power is our voice and our vote. We are sharing our voice together right now, and we're sharing it on social media and with our friends and our co-workers and families. But it's the second part of that power that is as important. Matter of fact, I believe it may be even more important. The leaders we elect, especially in 2016, will determine the path of our nation and where we're going to go going forward. Since 2008, the nation has believed, by large majority, that we are on the wrong track. The restriction, and in essence the destruction of the Second Amendment, is only one brick in that path that we are currently traveling. And as a nation, we don't want to continue down. We can only change our course by making sure, on every elected level, that the people we choose to represent our voice actually are using our words. Sitting back and not voting doesn't work. That's how we got to this point in history. And re-electing people who make grand promises and then act against our will, in fact, acting against our freedoms, has made the problem almost intractable. Therefore, we must do something that as a nation and as a state and as a community we may have forgotten. We must vote with a clear and determined purpose. Now, I leave it to you to decide who you should vote for. Do your own research. Look at the votes and words of those that seek to gain your vote. Evaluate what you think is the best choice for your family, your friends, and our community, and our nation. Because we can either give up our freedoms and our rights for a belief that has no basis in fact, what some may call a delusion, or we can defend the very things that created and grew our nation and once made us prosperous. And with that, I want to say I thank you all for this opportunity to share my thoughts, to share the outlook and the opportunity that we have in front of us, an opportunity. We have an opportunity in 2016 to vote, to elect good leaders, people who will be our voice, that will protect our rights and our freedoms and the Second Amendment. And I thank you for having the opportunity to share that with you, because this makes us all stronger. This gets us onto that right path that we all know we should be on, that we're not on right now. So I thank you, and I hope God blesses us all.